The horrors of war in the middle of Europe are bringing shocks to our lives. Especially now, we must stand together, work together to defend these values: freedom, rule of law, and human rights. I hope that we are witnessing the watershed moment which is defining the geopolitical situation of the Europe and this region we are right now. Let's have a moment of silence as a sign of respect and honor for those who pay the ultimate price for the freedom and values we share. Thank you. However, we need to work further. Life is going on, and I think that intimidation and fear is what is feeding the aggressor. That's why we're having this forum today, which will bring the discussion about the values we think are important, are meaningful, and are defining the Europe. It's privacy, data protection, and ethics. Today we'll have a 4-hour forum which will be exactly dedicated to these topics. During the conference, we'll raise the following questions. Is ethical data management the same as sustainable data management? Is ethical data management at all possible during these times when data is generated at such big volumes every second by second? Is GDPR equal to sustainable data protection or vice versa? Maybe GDPR is, and compliance with GDPR is creating problems and is creating even more unsustainable solutions, even more data, which at the end of the day is not that good for the society at large. The first part will be dedicated to a more classical narrative of data protection and ethics. Data privacy and GDPR as a tools for data minimization, as a tool for data ethics, and as a tool for privacy at large. Online marketing and solicitation, whether this is at all possible in data compliant way during this world. AI and technology developments, whether these are playing hand in hand with privacy and ethical narrative or vice versa. Maybe these are the obstacles or the challenges which technologies are raising, and they are not going in the same direction the GDPR narrative is going. The second session will concentrate on more difficult and novel problems. Is online business marketing possible without the use of the personal data? Costs of the GDPR compliance and a threat to sustainability. Is GDPR fostering sustainable data management or vice versa? It undermines the excessive burden. Is zero-party data management the only possible future marketing tool escaping from the GDPR rules? Of course, the main objective is not to provide answers. The main objective is not to provide academic or definitive clear vision. The objective of this forum is to provoke, instigate, and discuss. I'm sure you will have certain valuable takeaways and calls to action in a meaningful way. Practicalities. This conference is about to take 4.5 hours. It's divided into 2 sessions. The first session is opened right now. It will end at 3 p.m. The second session will end up at 5:30 Eastern European time. We'll have a very short break between the first and second session of 5 minutes. There will be no discussion panel, no moderation at the end of the panel session. There will be a couple of questions under the auspice of the system after each of the speakers. There will be a short break after the first session, which will be, as I've said, 5 minutes. Or content created during the event will be posted on a freely available platforms and available for further use, such as YouTube and LinkedIn. Speakers, of course, I'm more than grateful to have the best of the best practitioners, academics, visionaries, lawyers, businessmen, and we have selected the composition which I'm sure will provide this discussion and provide the content in a meaningful way. So my honor to present the first speaker who will open, as a keynote speaker, who will open the first session. It's Anna Romberg, co-founder of Nordic Business Ethics Initiative and EVP Legal Compliance and Governance at Getinge as our keynote speaker. So Anne, the year is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be part of this very important event. As said, a day like today is a day when we really are reminded of our values, of what we cherish in the Western part of the world, freedom of speech, human rights, equal opportunities, and the right to our personal integrity. So I think, as it was said, this is a really good moment of to reflect upon our part in this, what we can do, and especially as legal and ethics and compliance professionals, what can we do to advocate for good values, good business operations, sustainable use of data, and yeah, how can we have an influence at a root cause level? And I have a couple of things that I want to raise with you today, and I will open up a few slides in just a moment. But I want us to reflect upon the real purpose of our work, why we do what we do, and also to reflect upon how easy it is to sometimes go astray and hide behind legal structure, formalistic compliance programs, and not really think about what the ultimate purpose of our work is. So that will be really my first point, to take a moment and reflect upon the why, and really make sure that we feel inspired by this why, and we see what we on a personal level can do. Secondly, I do want to talk about personal courage, about us making sure that we also on a personal level, we speak up and we create an environment where others feel that they can speak up as well. Because as it comes to all type of compliance work, if we do not dare to talk about the ethical dilemmas, the gray zone, the not so easy judgment calls that we have to make, we will not bring about a sustainable change. So I want us all, secondly, then to focus on being courageous in raising ethical dilemmas and having those dialogues. So to open up my slides, I hope you can see them now in presentation mode here. So a bit of my background so you're able to put me in a box. Who am I? So I'm originally from Finland, but now today I'm in Sweden actually. So I'm coming to you from Gothenburg, Sweden, and I have a passion for ethical business and good governance, and really to see how corporations can play a part in bringing about a more sustainable world. I have a background, actually worked for PwC for some years, spent quite many years at Telia company, where I got my steel bath into the world of ethics and compliance. And at that time, my introduction to the world of compliance was through anti-bribery and corruption work. So I was responsible for Telia's global compliance program in relation to anti-bribery and corruption for some years, when we, among others, negotiated with the Department of Justice and the US Securities and Exchange Commission. So I tend to say I have learned the hard way of what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and among others, really learned how compliance not only have a huge impact on companies, but actually on societies as well. Telia company used to have quite extensive operations in the CIS countries, the former Soviet Union countries. Telia are no longer present there in, for example, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and so on. I think it's a painful, I'm not going to talk about that today, but it's just a painful lesson of, if you do not consider compliance aspects proactively, what does it really mean for a company? After Telia, I moved on, worked at a Finnish company called Cargotec. It's heavy manufacturing, and built all of their ethics and compliance work, among others also the data privacy compliance program. As was said, I'm a founder of the Nordic Business Ethics Initiative. We are a professional network. Anybody can join who is passionate about good business, responsible leadership, and we try to provide insights and inspirations. We do an annual survey as well that we have done in the Nordics for 3 years. We are fingers crossed. We're really hoping to be able to extend this survey to the Baltics as well. But what we look at is how employees perceive ethics at their workplaces. And I will, at the end of my presentation, when I conclude upon ethical dilemmas and our personal role, I will take up some insights from this survey. And at the moment, as was said, I'm really proud to be working for Getinge as heading up the legal compliance and governance function here. We are a global med tech company that operates quite a lot in the digital space. We see huge opportunities with improving patient health, hospital care, to bring about savings as well, to make sure hospitals work in an efficient way. So we are really digitalizing our business. And of course, the data privacy aspects are critical in this work. So this is a question and a topic that's really close to my heart. I'm also an author and a researcher. I've written a book called The Gray Zone, which is really a practical handbook into compliance and business ethics. And I managed to complete a PhD degree as well some years ago. And in my thesis, what I do explore is the personal, how ethics and compliance programs can become really personalized, and how we many times become sort of embodied in the work and have a critical role in fostering ethical business conduct. And sometimes that can be very burdensome. And I'm sure many of us have been sort of in the middle of ethical dilemmas, felt the pressure, and sort of trying to be the good ethical conscience of corporations. We can get pretty squeezed sometimes. So I'm really intrigued by the personal aspect of our compliance programs. But to then talk a little bit about the why. So as I said, I want us to reflect upon why we do what we do. Why do we implement ethics in compliance programs? Why do we implement data privacy compliance programs? A couple of years ago, when the GDPR entered into force, I think many of us, perhaps most of you on the line, just scrabbled with, okay, what will this mean in practice? We ran out and just did the various type of assessments and tried to identify all the systems that we have, the data classifications, and do these kind of impact assessments, and not really knowing, what that would look like in the end. And now, of course, we are some years into GDPR compliance, and we know more about what a risk-based approach really looks like. And at least personally for me, what I have learned is that it is all about the risk-based approach. It is about not only about fulfilling the letter of the law, but really understanding the ethical implications and setting the risk tolerance for our organizations. What type of companies, businesses, organizations do we want to be? Because at the end of the day, we can implement formal compliance programs, and there are various ways of depicting these kind of programs. And here on the slide, I have one way of portraying the various type of elements in an effective compliance program. We do our risk assessments, impact assessments. We have policies and procedures and data privacy notices. We work with training and communications, and we work with our third parties, with our suppliers, with our business partners to make sure, we have the correct agreements in place and so on. We work with reporting to top management, have dedicated data privacy officers and an organizational structure in place. I mean, this is what we know. We know how to build compliance programs, how to sort of fulfill the letter of the law. Um, but what is, in my mind, even more important is how do we then manage what comes out from this program, right? Because when we are implementing these procedures, when we put them into practice, we are encountering dilemma situation. We are, becoming part of the gray zone where we have to start making judgment calls. So what, and some examples of this, I'll sort of touch upon a few of them in just a second, but I think the critical part of the why and of our compliance programs is what do we then do when we have these dilemmas, when we have this information, when we need to make a decision, what kind of conduct, the behaviors, what do we do with this? Do we, take excessive risk? Do we deprioritize some aspects? Do we think, okay, this, is not such a big deal? Or do we actually uphold the values of personal integrity? And it's actually what happens with the conduct, what type of behaviors we do make. That is what will set the culture of our organization. And that is what matters at the end of the day. Because if we reflect upon the why, it is all about human rights, right? It is all about our personal integrity. It's about my personal integrity, that I should be able to know, what is out there about me? How is my data treated? Who is profiting from what? Am I okay with that? That is the ultimate purpose. And do we have that really ingrained in our decision making, that we think about this ultimate why? It is not about the formal procedure, but it's really about the purpose of that procedure. And that is when it sometimes becomes very personalized. Perhaps from a management perspective, you rely more on legal opinions and, formally what can you do and what can't you do, and do not really put the individual in the center. So even if we can do something from a legal perspective, should we do it? Is it the right thing to do? And that is the very important discussions that we need to have in working with compliance. Because one of my favorite sayings is, what is legal is not always the right thing to do. So that is something we have to think about. Is the decisions, the decisions that we make today, can we stand up for them in 5 years' time? Are we okay with those decisions being scrutinized? And can we say, yeah, it was legal, we had a legal opinion, it should be surely okay? Or are there ethical implications that will be of relevance when scrutinized in a new light? So I think it's super important to remember the ultimate purpose, what it is about, and to focus on the decisions and the actual conduct, and understand that, it's not what we say, but it's actually what we do that makes the difference. So to reflect upon a few ethical dilemmas, and here I would love to have a more in-depth discussions with you on how to handle these. But a couple of dilemmas that I have encountered myself in my work, and when also talking to peers in other organizations, is, for example, the first one. So I'll where I have used 3 words: misconduct culture and personal integrity. So when working with compliance, when working with ethics in compliance, it's critical that we react to misconduct, right? If somebody's breaking our code of conduct, breaking the rules, doing something unethical or possibly even illegal, we have to react. And it's very clear in the new directive coming out, the EU whistleblowing directive as well, that speaking up, having a culture where employees, first of all, feel they can speak up, but then also know that something is done about it, it's really incremental. But then what do we do? So in a scenario where there's been some misconduct, so let's say there is a manager that has put up a scheme where they are collaborating with a supplier to embezzle funds from the company. And we get a whistleblowing report about that. And we investigate it and we see, yes, it's actually true. This manager has embezzled funds and colluded with a supplier to sort of do that. And we fire the employee, and we sort of deal, we don't do business with the supplier anymore. And what then? Usually in these cases, the closest, people in the same team, there are rumors, people have known about this. Our colleagues, they know that there was this close relationship with this manager and the supplier, and that we paid overpriced as a company for certain purchases. What about if we don't communicate anything about that internally? Because we are afraid of, the personal integrity aspect of this individual as well. So how do we communicate that in a respectful way so we can set a good culture where everybody understands that we react seriously to misconduct, but at the same time, we don't want to hang out this one employee either, because that can, of course, have devastating consequences as well. So how do we really deal with that? And for me, it's really a case by case judgment call, but it's very important that we communicate somehow, and then try to balance these aspects of setting the tone, setting the culture, but then making sure we sort of protect personal integrity and the reputation of former colleagues as well. So that's one. Another one, which is a sort of a new dilemma for me, which is very interesting to see the discussion around diversity, right? I think we are all seeing diversity and inclusion is a super hot topic. And here I've seen some very interesting examples of companies. There are some Swedish big owner who actually have put requirements on their portfolio companies to really start tracking various type of diversity aspects of recruitments and also of existing employees. And then we have ESG, environment, social, and governance, which is sort of putting requirement now that investors want to see. How do you rank yourself? What are you doing? How diverse is your company, right? And here, obviously, I think we all understand that we can collect aggregated data and anonymous data and try to get a picture outwards of diversity aspects. But what becomes a bit of a dilemma is that how do we get this data, right? If we think about the wide spectrum of diversity, it's not only about male, female, right? We know it's so much more. It's so, but am I obliged to tell my employer of my personal beliefs or what not when it comes to diversity? Should I tell my employer so they are able to report in the ESG report on various type of diversity parameters? Or is it my personal thing to really, why should I tell everybody about some personal traits that may rank high on a diversity scale? So for me, that's a really tricky one, because obviously companies, I think it's good that we should show how we value diversity and make sure employees feel comfortable to be who they are and believe what they want to believe in and so on. But on the other hand, why should we ask for the sake of reporting, and how do we really do that? And even if we would gather data in sort of a legally compliant way, again, for me personally, the question is, why should I tell my employer about that? Why should they know about it? So I think that's an interesting discussion that we need to have in the community. And then my final example is coming to, the pandemic that we are hopefully coming out from. But there, various countries have had very different approaches. But in some countries, you have not been allowed to let employees into the offices without, for example, checking the vaccination status. And it's a public health concern. You have an obligation to care for employee safety and for those that come into the office. But on the other hand, again, is this something really that the employer should know about, or is it a more personal thing? And how do you manage that without really creating records and also making sure that we uphold sort of a freedom of choice. So I think these are just some very practical examples that I have encountered. And yeah, I'm sure you would have many more. And I hope that I would be able to meet up with you and discuss this in more detail, how you have handled them. But again, as I said, when we have these situations, I think probably many of you have in your mind, okay, but legally we can do it like this, we can have this process, we can ask for consent and so on. So we can be compliant. But then what about the ethical aspect and putting the human being in center and ask, okay, but should we really do this? And why are we doing this? Being mindful of time here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about speaking up and conclude with that. You are all aware, of course, of these big data privacy related scandals that have originated from whistleblowers who have been brave enough to say, okay, enough is enough. Are we really thinking about privacy here? Are we really putting the human being in the center, or are we just focusing on mere compliance? And when it comes to speaking up, what we see in our survey is a little bit devastating, I would say. And here we talk about Nordic companies. So as I said, we hopefully will be able to do this survey in the Baltic countries in a near future, but now we have Nordic data. So these are employees working in a wide variety of Nordic organizations. And when we have asked them, have you witnessed anything unethical or illegal at your workplace? A majority says yes. And our following question was, so what did you do about it? And in 2019, 47% said, I didn't do anything, where 62% in 2020 said, I did not do anything. So I think we should be very mindful of that. The human behavior is not to speak up. When we see something that's wrong, our inclination is to do nothing. And we need to work against this and become bold, and also realize that if we are not standing tall and standing up for what is right, who is going to do it? And it's always going to be uncomfortable. So that's sort of my main message to all of us, that it's always uncomfortable to speak up. But if we do it together and really cherish the good values, what we believe in, we will make a huge difference. So business ethics, responsibility, and good governance should feel a little bit uncomfortable, because that's how we know that we're actually making a difference. So with that, I want to thank you all for again inviting me. And yeah, I wish you all a great rest of the day and a superb conference.
Thank you, Anna, for interesting insights and for perfect presentation. I do have one question, which is about the dilemma. And as far as I understand, and as far as we have noticed from practice, we always have the dilemma in places where there is a conflict between what's legal and what's right, what's legitimate and what's right. And of course, it depends very much on the culture, how companies, achieve that. But the survey and research shows that employees and team members and staff, they do appreciate very much when the employer tries to seek what's right, even in those situations where it runs counter to what is perfectly legal. So maybe we have some, recipes, or maybe some, boilerplate action plan for the board, how to start implementing this culture which solves the dilemma in a right and sustainable way. Maybe you have some insights or recipes for the board from where to start.
Yeah, great question. So thank you for that. So first, I would say, by focusing on the human, put yourself in the middle of that dilemma. Analyze the dilemma from your personal perspective and decide on who you want to be. What kind of human being do I want to be, and how do I want to be treated? And I think, by not distancing ourselves, I think too often we are distancing ourselves from the problem by legal opinions, for example, and it feels very comfortable because it's there on the paper and it's very abstract. But let's bring ourselves into that situation and put the human at the forefront. And I think that's a good place to start.